Tell me, how many times have you tried developing a UI system only to find it getting messy over time? Maybe you end up with a monolithic master widget that touches every part of the codebase, and changing one thing breaks many. Or, if you wanted, let's say, to change the font for all your text in your widgets, you'd have to manually find every text block in a very tedious and error-prone process. Or, you don't know what's better for optimization, creating and removing widgets or hiding and showing them. And you are wondering, what are some of the best practices I should apply to develop a modular, scalable, and optimized UI system? Hi, I'm Amr, and for a long while I struggled with that as well. So for the past 3 to 4 weeks, I did some research about the best UI practices from multiple sources, which I'll be linking in the description. To demonstrate the importance of these practices, we're going to take a look at this simple UI system, which is written in 2 ways. One that doesn't follow these practices, and the other does. With each one, we will be showing why the bad practice fails and how the better practice can be a better solution. This video aims to let you know that these practices exist and when and why you should apply them, not a step-by-step tutorial showing how they are implemented, which we'll be doing in another time. So, without further ado, let's get started. Tip number 1. Create base reusable widgets. Now let's say our UI designer wanted to change the text color in the whole project from white to yellow. To do that, usually we'd have to find every text block in every widget, which can be frustrating, wastes time, and we'll have lots of messes. What we can do instead is create base widgets for our most common widgets. For example, buttons, text blocks, and borders. In this example, I have created this button and gave it some parameterization properties by marking them as instance editable and hooking them in pre-construct. We can simply change the color now with a single click. If for some reason some widgets don't update, which is a known bug, all we have to do is make sure we save everything, filter our content by widget, select everything, and reload assets. Tip number 2. Use named slots for templating. Sometimes we have widgets that share similar parts, but also have some changing parts. For example, if we look at these panels, they all share the same black border and header text, but they have different content. To do that, normally we'd have to duplicate the border and text block in all of these panels. What we can do better is use named slots, which are widgets that expose a single child in any of their instances. Here, we have a base panel with a black border and a text block, and a body named slot. In this inventor screen, we can override this body slot with whatever we want, and we can do the same here for this settings screen. Tip number 3. Use different layers to manage screens and panels. Now, this question tricked me for a while. How can I manage different screens without having a messy system that is tightly coupled? For example, we want to show this inventor screen when I press the I key, and when I press the Q key, my quest screen should come up and the inventor screen should hide. Then, if I overlapped with this dialog box, a dialog model should hide everything and show up. And if I pause the game now, my pause menu should show on top. One solution to achieve that, which I used to do, is to have one widget containing all these panels. When any panel needs to show up, it needs to reference every other panel and control its visibility, ending with a very coupled and hard to maintain or scale solution. So, what can we do better? As I came across this Unity Tech blog and found it similar to the UI manager in the Lyra project, we can use different layers to manage different types of widgets. Let me explain. A layer is a stack of widgets. It allows us to pop and push widgets to it. In our example, we will have 4 layers. A game layer for our HUD or widgets that are always visible. a game menu layer for gameplay menus like our inventory and quest screens. Then a menu layer, which will be pushing menus that are not part of the gameplay. For example, our pause and settings menus. Then a final modal layer for pop-ups and dialog screens. And then the system has a little UI manager, which encapsulates these layers and exposes their functions to allow the creation or removal of these widgets. This can be a subsystem, a blueprint function library, or something else. This way, we can create or remove widgets without them knowing anything about each other or about their layers. If you wanted to add a new layer, nothing will be affected, and we no longer have a monolithic master widget that touches every part of the code base. Tip number 4. Put data into separate objects. In this example, we have a weapon slot that needs to know the icon of the currently equipped weapon. An easy solution would be to use a function binding, but that has two problems. The first one is that it runs every frame, which we don't need. And the second one is that it keeps us coupled to our weapon component as we cast to it. A little improvement would be to cache the weapon component and use property binding, but still we have the same two problems. What we can do better is to use events and only update the icon when a new weapon is equipped. This solves our optimization problem. But if we look at the widget's reference viewer, the coupling problem to the weapon component still exists. How can we communicate data between gameplay code and UI without coupling them together? And without having a monolithic game instance that knows everything about the system? This is important for many reasons. What if later on we decided to remove the weapon component completely, or get our weapon icons from a database? Why should our UI be affected by that? So, what can we do better? In this Unity talk, Ryan Hippel recommends creating separate objects to hold the data that need to be communicated. Fortunately for us, a similar system to that can be achieved in Unreal Engine by using the View Models plugin. After enabling the plugin, we can create a View Model child class and add the data we need. Then, our game code updates the data when something changes, and our UI in the other side listens to the changes in the view model to update its widgets. Now, our reference viewer is happy, the two problems are solved, and we can change our code or UI without breaking anything. Now let's focus on optimization. But before we get into it, let's name a few things that can cause poor performance for UI, as explained in this great talk about UI optimization. For example, frequent calls to the create widget function, widget text, how many widgets are visible in a frame, how many of those are hit testable, how nested our widget hierarchy is, and what is the size of the textures used for UI, and many other things. And let's make it clear that everything depends on your context, so make sure to profile first. Tip number 5. Use UI invalidation. Now, we already mentioned the first tip about optimization when we talked about using events instead of function or property bindings. The second tip allows us to cache the widgets that don't change every frame, and to use their cache layout instead of recalculating it every frame. For example, this health bar doesn't need to change or be reprinted every frame. It does only update when the player takes damage. So, to cache it, what we can do is to wrap it with an invalidation box, which caches its layout and updates it only when the widget changes any of its properties. Tip number 6. Animate using materials. Now let's take a look at this example. Here we have a button that needs to animate when hovered. To do that, normally we would animate it through sequencer, but that can be very limited, and it runs on the CPU. What we can do better is use material instances. These have a couple of advantages. The first one is that they run on the GPU, which can handle more complex calculations. The second is that they allow us to make more advanced animations without having to add more widgets or textures. For example, what if we have some looping animations or particle effects or glowing effects? I don't believe we can achieve that easily with Sequencer. For this example, I've borrowed this button material from the UI Material Lab project that I recommend you take a look at it. The third advantage is that, as we mentioned in validation boxes, using materials and animating their parameters through Sequencer is an exception that doesn't invalidate our widget's layout. If we debug our invalidation and take a look at this widget, which is animated with no materials, we can see it invalidating, while this one, which is animated using materials, doesn't invalidate. Tip number 7. Break up your widgets into categories for construction. Now back to the question of, should I create and remove widgets, or should I hide and show them? The simple answer to that is you should be using both. Let me read this part about UI optimization from Unreal's docs. Any widgets that require fast response times should be loaded in the background, even when not displayed. For example, an inventory screen is used very frequently and should be highly responsive, so keeping it loaded but not visible is good practice. For widgets that are not present for long periods of time and do not require fast response, they should be loaded asynchronously at runtime and destroyed when dismissed. That's why when we discussed layer, our game menu layer had only one widget that contains the inventory screen, the quest screen, and the ability screens wrapped by a widget switcher. Tip number 8. Use collapsed instead of hidden. Now, when we hide widgets, like this armor bar for example, their layout is still calculated, even if they are not painted. Making them collapse is the only option that totally ignores them. Tip number 9. Use not hit testable instead of visible. For some widgets, we don't need to interact with them. For example, the health bar and the equipped weapon slots. Keeping these visible calculates their hit test grid, which allows us to interact and click on them. But we don't need that. So, making them not hit testable, we avoid some unnecessary calculations. Tip number 10. Use canvas panels and overlays sparingly. Now, I used to use canvas panels everywhere. They are easy to use and they allow us to position widgets in any way we want. But this was shocking for me, as it turns out that for canvas panels to allow us to draw widgets on top of each other, it uses more draw calls. Of course, using them occasionally is not a big issue, but when possible, try replacing them with grid panels instead. By using the nudge property, we can still position our widgets where we want without having those extra draw calls. Tip number 11. Use spacers instead of size boxes when possible. I usually used size boxes to make some padding or spaces between my widgets. But it turns out that size boxes use multiple passes to calculate their size and render themselves. A better solution that we can do if we need content to take up a certain size in width and height is to use spacers, which are significantly cheaper. Tip number 12. Use soft references. In this example, we have a character selection screen that stores an array of characters. And just by having this array, all of its elements with everything that they are referencing, like meshes, textures, materials, and maybe other classes, are loaded into memory. Even if we are just choosing one character, we are still loading all of them. A better solution to avoid that is to use soft references instead, which breaks that reference chain and only load the class that we need when we need to. Tip number 13. Consider custom icon fonts. Now let's get into the last two extreme tips we have for this video. One of the ways to optimize UI is to minimize our texture memory size. In this GDC talk, the developers of God of War did something creative.
The single biggest way we saved memory on Ragnarok was by utilizing a custom icon font. Using applications like FontForge, we loaded in black and white icons into a font sheet, and then we were recalling them in-game by using a Unicode value. And this was a huge savings for us. Instead of having material and texture costs for over 200 icons, we could instead leverage a single font that was baked into a 2048 by 2048 texture that was then compressed further down.
I was very interested to test that. So I opened up a website called Fontello. I uploaded a font that I already had, which extracted the elements that were used in that font, which are called glyphs. Then I merged some glyphs from the website, downloaded the font, and imported it inside Unreal. Now, to use any of these icons, instead of adding image, all we need to do is to add a text block and write down the Unicode value for that icon. To determine the Unicode values, I used the demo page that came with that font. But for some reason, the Unicode values weren't understood by Blueprints. So instead, I copy-pasted the glyph itself in the text block, and it worked. This can be very beneficial in saving texture memory and having less widgets. For example, being able to write this with a single text block. Tip number 14. Consider SMeshWidgets for lots of instances of the same widget. In some games, you would have multiple instances of the same widgets. For example, if we have enemy health bars or minimap icons or PUIs in the world. What we usually do is use a widget component. But it turns out that these widget components can be costly to render. As for a widget to render this way, it must be painted first, then rendered on a texture target. Instead, there is an unpopular way to do that, using a widget called SMeshWidget, which allows us to draw 2D meshes with a single draw call. Think about it as foliage, but for UI. Now this one wasn't well documented, but thanks to this example by Nick Darnell, I was able to implement that for these health bars. To explain how it works briefly, we need to pass a static mesh to the mesh widget. We do that through something called a slate vector art data. And inside our mesh widget, we use the draw mesh function and the enable instancing function. Now, how can we control the position and the parameters of each instance? Each instance is a 4D vector consisting of 4 float variables. The X and Y determine the screen position, the Z determines the scale, and the W determines something called a base address, which I'm still figuring out. These values are then used in a UI material that we created and assigned to our mesh to change how the instance will look and where it will be positioned. Like most of the topics discussed in this video, we will be making different videos showing how to implement them in detail. This video aimed to let you know that these ways of doing things exist. Not necessarily that they are the right way to do things. There's no right or wrong when it comes to patterns and strategies. So make sure you understand when and why you should use them. I totally recommend taking a look at the resources, which explain these topics into more detail by people more knowledgeable than myself. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. This was Amr Hamid, and I shall see you in the next one.